She helped build the United States Space Force from the ground up. She was ranked number 2 in the entire service for promotion to colonel. And then, with no warning, the government told her she was undisciplined, dishonorable, and a liar, and they wouldn't even let her wear her own uniform to say goodbye. This is the story of a 23-year career that started on the morning of 9/11 and ended not with a retirement ceremony, but with a 3-star general warning her she could still be charged under the UCMJ just for speaking out. Colonel Bree Fram, retired U.S. Space Force and Air Force officer, astronautical engineer, author, and now congressional candidate. She didn't leave service, service left her, and she's not done fighting. In this episode, she breaks down what it actually felt like to come out inside the Pentagon, how authenticity made her team better, and what happened in a room full of admirals and generals on her last day that stopped everyone cold. I'm Mike Komorous, and this is Voice for Valor.
Today's guest has lived a life defined by service in the highest stakes places, a journey driven by curiosity, commitment, and conscience. Colonel Bree Fram is a retired U.S. Space Force and Air Force officer, an astronautical engineer, an author and editor, a speaker, and a storyteller, and now a candidate for U.S. Congress, carrying her service into a new arena of public life. She commissioned in the wake of 9/11, served in an operational deployments in Iraq and Qatar, developed strategic space acquisition policy at the Pentagon, led inclusion initiatives, co-authored books about transgender military service, and helped build the Space Force itself. Her career didn't end by choice. It ended because a policy barred her from continuing to serve, an ending that became a new beginning. As Bree stepped into advocacy and now into the electoral politics. This is not a story about conflict alone. It's about conviction, authenticity, and the courage to serve, even when that service is contested. Bree, welcome to Voice for Valor.
Oh, Mike, it's a pleasure to join you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we talk roles and assignments, how do you define service in its rawest sense, not its ceremonial one?
Ooh, that is a deep question. I think where I look at service is really it's answering the question of who is this for? Is it for me or is it for all of us? If it's for all of us, that's service. And that's where I think the military is such a great example of what service looks like, because no one is there in a role that is just for them. They are all part of something that is part of something much, much larger than any one of us. And it is about all of us. It is about ensuring the freedoms that gave us the opportunity to choose the military, choose to serve, and make sure that's there for generations to come. So fundamentally, that's how I see service is who's it for? Who's it for?
What moment in your life made you realize you wanted to answer this call of service?
It was 9/11, without a doubt. I grew up, and I hope this is a story we get into a little more, in a family that had incredible military history. But despite that, I had no intention of joining the military. I graduated college in 2001 with my aerospace engineering degree, and I was looking for jobs. I applied to NASA and to Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, all those big organizations, because I just wanted to help humanity expand into the stars and be part of this amazing future that I know we're going to have in space. But as I was applying for those jobs, we were attacked. And my worldview changed, really in an instant. I wrote a letter to friends and family about what I'd learned just a day or two after I watched the towers fall. And by that weekend, as I was driving up to see my girlfriend, who is now my wife, it was a 2-hour drive, and there was an American flag hanging from an overpass on Interstate 35 between Minneapolis and Duluth, Minnesota. You know, the thing that I had done that drive so many times that I could do it on autopilot. I saw that flag, broke into tears, cried for an hour, walked into my girlfriend's apartment and said, I'm going to join the Air Force. this is what it will be for me to defend the freedoms and opportunities that men like my grandfathers and so many others had fought for to give me the choice. And right now, I'm choosing to serve because I realize that freedom was free, and it had to be a choice made by every generation to defend it.
So did you grow up in Minnesota? Is that where you're from?
I did. Much of my family remains there. It was a beautiful place to be from. I like to think it gave me an incredible moral foundation. I think we've seen that a lot over the past month. I've had a lot of phone calls with friends in Minnesota that both break my heart and renew my spirit at the same time. A friend of mine from way back when, now a high school teacher, at a city school in the Twin Cities, and him talking about the fact that a third of his students weren't showing up because they were too afraid to leave their houses. And for him as an adoptee, with skin that didn't look like mine, to have to carry his passport everywhere he went, in the effect, putting us as a show me your papers society. And that's one of the things that I learned about as being incredibly problematic. I had family that got out of Germany and Poland in the 30s and 40s, and they had those Nazi passbooks stamped with a bright red jade at the classic movie where you get that Nazi character, show me your papers. That was what they had to show in that case. And we have Americans doing the same thing, just trying to be safe and prove that they belong here.
Here's where our paths connect, and we didn't even realize it at the time. So you graduated college in the Minnesota area. My sister lived in Minnesota, and so one summer she asked me to come out and basically look after my niece while I was in college. So I lived there for a summer and took care of my niece and worked at Don Pablo's Mexican Kitchen near the Mall of America. And one thing I realized about my time in Minnesota, everybody was so unbelievably kind. I did not meet somebody that just wasn't genuinely a nice person. And then also, as the things going on in the news right now, when I was working at this Mexican kitchen, one of the waiters there was an immigrant. He was from Mexico. But at the time, we still had open border policies. So he would actually work in the United States and then take his money home at the end of the year and support his family in Mexico. That was the first person I ever actually met that still went to and from the border like that. But yeah, I mean, what's going on in Minnesota right now, it's just... It's sad for both sides. I feel really bad for our law enforcement folks that have to just, do their job. One of my best friends growing up was in law enforcement. So I feel bad for them for the fact that they still have to do their job. But yeah, what's going on right now is just tragic. So
well, we were closer than you think, because I worked at the Mall of America through college at a store there. And I think what you kind of mentioned speaks to the value that immigration has offered for our country. There was a study published just a week or two ago by the Cato Institute that said the amount of input immigrants have given to our economy just over the past 30 years is a $14.5 trillion surplus compared to any benefits they've received at all levels, federal to local, state government. And that was people that were here legally and otherwise. So they're adding to the fabric of America, both economically and, as Minnesota has shown us, they're our neighbors, they're our friends. They add a lot of value to who we are. They are the American story.
I'm glad you brought up the economics piece, because I discuss these economics all the time with folks. And what I try to explain is our economy is dependent upon 3% GDP, gross domestic product. If you don't have a birth rate of at least 2.1 within the United States, you need to grow enough to maintain that 3% GDP. And then the counter argument they say is, well, I don't care about immigration. I just want to make sure it's legal immigration. Like, once again, our legal immigration has just been decimated. We're cutting so many opportunities coming to the United States. So in a way, I don't think it's just illegal immigration. I think it's the fact that just immigration in itself, and this past year, I believe, was the first in over 50 years that we've actually had negative migration in the United States.
And right now, there are so many Americans that are afraid of what the federal government is going to do to them that we have actually become a source of refugees. The United States has historically been a beacon to them. literally that's what the Statue of Liberty is. And that great poem, send us your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Instead, we're exporting people like that right now because they're so afraid, maybe not for what's going to happen to them, but what's going to happen to their, and that really breaks my heart when I think about America having that image where people are fleeing because they're afraid here at home.
I want to talk a little bit about your career in time in uniform. Your career spanned more than 2 decades, including the stand-up of the U.S. Space Force. How did it feel to be part of building something entirely new?
I was so excited when the Space Force finally sent me the email that said, "You've been selected. Would you like to join the Space Force?" It felt like a marriage proposal. And I was like, yes, 1,000 times yes. This is forever. Because that was my dream. My animating principle, other than, joining and serving, was which a friend of mine made me watch over my objection when I was about 9, 10 years old. I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm like, I'm going to be Geordi. I'm going to make the warp engines go, and I'm going to help solve all the galaxy's toughest problems. So with that as kind of my spirit, and having literally seen a crew come together from different worlds and work to make things happen, I'm like, this is what we can do in the Space Force. Not only do we have the cool opportunity to select people, who really want to be, we have cool tech, we have amazing people, but it was an opportunity to create a 21st century military culture and to do something new, to shed some of the baggage of literally a 19th century past and some military policies that we could say, okay, let's try this in different ways. Let's make sure that we treat people as individuals. We get the most out of them. We allow them to be their best self and actually form those cohesive bonds with the people around you that are the hallmark of high-performing teams. So more than anything, even though I loved the tech, it was the people, it was the culture that was really exciting to help build.
Were you an acquisition officer before the Space Force transition?
Yeah, so my entire career as a developmental engineer, which means you know enough about engineering, but a lot of your job is acquisition. It is program management. So you go back and forth across the acquisition lifecycle from designing, developing, planning to acquisition, operations, support, maintenance. We do all of that. And it was fascinating for me to have a number of assignments that worked across that entire life cycle. And it was a ton of fun to see systems that I worked on at the beginning of my career become reality, and in some cases help take technology directly from the laboratory to the battlefield and see that in an incredibly short period of time go from concept to saving lives. That was amazing to be part of.
Right now, the Department of War has changed a lot of our acquisition process, trying to streamline some of these things. Are there any examples in the Space Force where you saw being an individual force allowed you to streamline or get some of these products to the warfighter sooner?
So first, just to hit the Department of War piece, because as someone who has had to change a name, I recognize something in that. And, it's not their legal name. They would have to go to Congress and ask for that to be changed. So it's their go-by. It's their call sign. It's what they want us to respect. Yet, I don't know, maybe this is what the president means when he says transgender for everybody. We're starting with the cabinet. So the Department of Defense has certainly done some things. And so if you want anything about a trans person, talking about name changes, we absolutely can go there. But yeah, we saw some things in acquisition reform that were about how do we make things faster? That has always been the goal. What can we cut? And that was a huge part of what I did in the Space Force as we took legacy processes that were either from the Department of Defense or in many cases from the Department of the Air Force. Like, how do we do things differently? And there was one on getting some approvals where there was a 13-step process that we inherited from the Air Force. And I got to write the revision to that policy along with my team, and we cut it to 4. Like,
Oh, wow.
there is no reason for any of these things where we're just sending paperwork. back to one another. And let's cut everywhere we can to be as fast and efficient as possible. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're there for. We're there to turn the American taxpayers' dollars into capability. And we need to do that quickly so that we stay far enough ahead of our adversaries that they won't even think about challenging us. Because that's the other area of major difference that I have with the current administration and their concept of what is a military for. To me, it's there to prevent wars from ever happening. And only if they do, we are going to kick so much ass that it is over in a heartbeat. But it is not to start wars. It is not to be the world's bully that causes our allies to send troops to defend allied territory against us. That's not who we are. I know, for one, I never signed up for a Department of War. I would not have signed up for a Department of War. We are there to defend and to protect.
That's one of the things that I try to explain to people as a senior military officer. I retired as a colonel as the same rank as you, that people don't realize the more senior you become in these military institutions, you're much less likely to want to go to war. You see all the ramifications of going to war. You understand exit strategies. You understand the cost of healthcare and the VA and all of these decisions that are financially you're responsible for 30 years later after that conflict. That as a senior military leader, I try to avoid war at all cost.
And you get that viewpoint that also shows you how does the entire government work together to prevent war? And we can go back again and again to Secretary Mattis testifying that says, if you don't want me to spend money on bullets, fully fund the State Department. Because it is by allies, it is by shared strength that you have that aura of deterrent. No one wants to mess with you because you have friends in every place. And you will come together and you will prevent and win conflict if it should start. So yeah, we need to understand the full aspect of how our government works together to prevent conflict and make that the focus. We only fight if we have to.
Similar to Mattis and Fallujah, there were times where he was trying to avoid going into Fallujah, and he said, but listen, if we go in, you've got to let me do this my way. This cannot be war by proxy of Vietnam, where we're making all these political decisions inside, the DC metro area. If I'm going to go in, we're going in with overwhelming force, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, we learned that in Desert Storm. We learned the lessons of Vietnam, we applied them, and then we struggled with that again. So we know how to win, and winning is never a half-assed thing. You go for it and you make it happen. And that's what I think we need to do today in so many ways too. And one of the things that animates my continuing service is when you see something and you know something can be done about it, go for it. This is not a half-assed effort. This is putting everything into it because I believe in democracy, because I believe in our Constitution, and we need to be better.
Back to your service, you came out publicly as transgender at a pivotal moment, when policy allowed open service. But now, what did that decision feel like personally and professionally?
Being able to be myself was a gift. And I say that not just as a gift to me. That was a gift to my team. It was a gift to our force. Because when you're in the closet, if you are hiding a piece of yourself, and I think this is something almost all of us can relate to, where if you have a work self that is different from who you really are, you are spending mental energy with your shields up. If we want to go to a Star Trek reference, all right, full power to the shield. But when you get to drop those shields, it's like stopping paying a tax, where I'm thinking about, well, what do I say about where I was this weekend? Or what do I say about what I like? Who I love. If you don't have to think about protecting yourself, you get to rededicate all that energy to the mission, to the people around you. So you can be good at your job. You might even be great at your job. But if you're hiding yourself, protecting who you are, you're never going to be as good as you possibly can be. So that's why when I came out, and after I sent an email. I put a Facebook post out to the world as soon as the Secretary of Defense was done speaking. I did worry. Like, what's the reaction going to be? Because this is out there now. And after about an hour away, where I did run off to the gym in the Pentagon and I got on the elliptical and went nowhere faster than I'd ever gone anywhere in my life, I sat back down at my desk. My colleagues walked over to me one by one, shook my hand, and we were a better team after that. I wasn't hiding. We had those bonds. We did amazing things on behalf of this country.
What year was that when you came out amongst your
That was in
colleagues?
2016 in June.
2016. And then now policies have shifted and that inclusion was revoked. What did that reversal feel like? Not just as an officer, but as someone who believed deeply in their service.
Well, it hurt. Even knowing it was coming, we had an attempt during the first Trump administration to ban us, and that was successful in terms of allowing no new trans people to come into the service, or if you were already in service, you could not come out and access care. But it allowed those of us who had already come out to continue serving. It was a ban. This time around, we knew it was coming again. It was like watching a hurricane form offshore, and you're like, where's it going to hit? How strong are the winds going to be? And it was devastating because this time, beyond the ban, it was also a purge. It was everyone who was serving. There's no exception. And it was also an attack on our character because the executive order that said that we were no longer allowed to serve called us undisciplined, dishonorable liars who lacked the humility required for military service. That was challenged. There were court cases in 2 different district courts. The judges found that there was no evidence to support any claim made by the government except animus. I mean, pure hatred. And one pointed out and said, the service records of the plaintiffs before her were Exhibit A as to why there was no evidence backing the government's claim. And because the government would say again and again, we failed to meet standards. Well, look at 20 years worth of performance reports that says meets or exceeds in my case alone. And that is replicated all across the board. There are people who have deployed, who have commanded, who have done every job the military has asked of them, and they kick ass. They earned the respect of the people to their left and right, who they counted on and who counted on them. So to see people being thrown out for something that had nothing to do with their ability to serve, it ripped my heart in two, or really into a million pieces, because I served with many of them. I helped tell their stories, and their stories have a lasting impact. But I want to offer you one of those stories from my final week in service, and how it showed me that I think we won the fight within the military. Just like the arguments that were thrown against African Americans, against women, against lesbians and gay folks, there were these repeated arguments that we were unwilling, unable to serve. And now, can you imagine a military without African Americans? I hope it's the same way about us, because my last day I walked into a meeting with the Joint Staff a couple days before. And because the Space Force is so small, we send someone who is 1 or 2 ranks below what every other service sent. So a room full of admirals and general and me. And it just so happens that as we go around the table at the end, I'm last. All right, Space Force, what do you got? I provided one work-related update on a requirement package we were working. And I said, I'm sorry, this is going to be my last meeting. I don't know when there's going to be a replacement. This is an unexpected departure. So the officer sitting next to me, "Hi, what assignment did you get? Where are you going?" And I'm like, well, I do not meet this administration's definition of military excellence and readiness, which was the title of the executive order. And silence kind of fell on the room. A couple seconds as what that meant. And the scene from 2016, in a weird way, repeated itself, because those admirals in general stood up, walked over to me, shook my hand, but this time with the sadness of past tense, said, "It's an honor to have served with you." And I held it back mostly until I made it out into the hall. I leaned against the wall of the U-ring corridor, and I just cried. because it was the honor of my lifetime to serve, to learn, to work alongside so many incredible people, and to advance the interests of the American people and the world. And I miss it dearly, that the uniform was taken away from me, that I can no longer even wear it. Couldn't wear it to my own retirement ceremony, or if I were to swear someone in, I would be brought up on charges for wearing my own uniform, because every action taken by this administration has been so cruel, in addition to being just get out. The cruelty knows no bounds.
You couldn't even wear your uniform to your retirement ceremony?
Not without cutting my hair, taking out my earrings, and not being who I was. Against our wishes, the Department of Defense changed back all of our service records to those that we signed up as. For me, 23 years earlier, and said, if you wear your uniform, we will bring you up on charge for being out of uniform. And it's like, it got worse too. I was summoned in a week before I was retired and told by a 3-star, you are still subject to the UCMJ after you retire. Like, are you threatening to Mark Kelly me? Is this what's going on? Are you just trying to silence? And maybe he thought he was protecting me or something, but that hurt. Like, I know what my rights are. I have right as a citizen, First Amendment rights. So I'm going to use them. You can threaten me all you want, but if the uniform gave me anything, even if it's a uniform you say I can't wear anymore, there's the courage to do right on behalf of others. And I'm going to keep doing it.
Let me be devil's advocate for a minute here, because we have a lot of listeners and viewers from both sides of the aisle. I want to put you in the shoes of, the current administration. So let's say that you're the Pete Hegseth today, and they look at the previous administration and they say, look, the left, you guys went way too far left. You were so focused on that, that 1%, that's such a small piece of, that's such a small community in our service that you ignored the bulk of our future recruits, like you mentioned, African Americans. So if the bulk of our recruits are African American, Hispanic, white men from, lower middle class rural communities, if we're not meeting our numbers, how would you do this differently to make sure that everybody's included under the tent?
Well, I think I would reject the premise because the numbers say a very different story. 30% of our recruiting age population right now identifies as members of the LGBT population. Are we really going to say you're not wanted here? Particularly if we face a shortage? 30% is a lot when we have a lot of Americans that don't meet standards for any other reason. And the argument the administration made over and over again was that this was about standard. And again, tell me what standard I didn't meet. Tell me when I was undeployable. Tell me when I was doing something that did not live up to the expectation. I mean, I had been out for nearly 10 years. When I was selected for promotion to colonel, I was the number 2 person in the service based on my record alone. And again, that's not just me. That is thousands of other trans service members who had to do their job under the harshest spotlight because there were some people watching for them to slip up. And that pressure is intense, and yet they thrived. They over and over again. And I want to offer one other example. I was at the Pentagon when we were going to hold a 10-year anniversary event for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that allowed lesbians, gays, and bisexuals to serve openly. And at the time, the Undersecretary of the Air Force asked for people to show up in the courtyard of the Pentagon who had served through that because she wanted to recognize them for their service. We're walking out there. She turns to an aide and says, there's no way any of these people are old enough to have served during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the response was, you're right, man. These are people serving today because Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone. So what we should be doing if we're worried about how many people are eligible for service is opening the aperture as broad as we possibly can be, setting the standard and letting people meet it. If you can meet the standard and you have a willingness to serve, serve, because it is about all of us. And we should want anyone who is willing to raise their hand, swear that oath, and serve on behalf of the American people.
I grew up in a very conservative family, a very Christian family. I was taught to, fear gaze, a lot of the rhetoric that we talk about today. And my mom is a nurse, and 3 or 4 years ago, she mentioned that there was a trans nurse in her clinic that she was working. And after about a year or two of working together, that member became her favorite person in the office. And now she's an advocate for all the things that were indoctrinated into me as a young person. And thankfully, I was taught and lost some of that ignorance and appreciation for everyone. But it's always nice to hear these stories of folks that are fearful of a community. And then once they get to know that particular person, that particular community, they realize, oh my gosh, we all really are actually the same.
It's the classic boogeyman. If you're a small enough portion of the population, it's easy for people to other you, to tell stories about you, to create stereotypes about you that are so far from the truth. I mean, the stories told about trans women like me, we would be a weeping mess that could never return fire from our foxhole because we were too busy worrying about what we were going to wear this night. Absolute nonsense. But it is that opportunity. As soon as we're face to face, we get to find that we root for the same sports team. We like the same restaurant. Whatever it is that allows you to bond over some shared aspect of humanity, you can break those stereotypes so quickly. And that's why I think, again, within the military, we won. We changed the culture by showing up. Even if there was only 10,000 of us, that means there's hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, that worked with all of us, that saw our competence, that saw our commitment, and we had the opportunity to change their mind, even if they believed something else about us.
So I mentioned that story from my mom, and then you've mentioned a few stories. So I know that you are an editor and a writer. So you've edited and written books about transgender military service and queer leadership. Why was capturing those narratives important?
For just this reason, shatter those stereotypes. Not only show that there's no one way to be trans, but there's no one way to be trans in the military, and that we are just as varied and diverse as everyone else that serves. And I like to say about me, and I think everyone whose story I captured in there, being trans is probably the 17th most interesting thing about any of those people. And I always worry when I say that, someone's like, tell me the 16 more interesting things. And I'm like, but I would figure it out eventually. Yeah. And so would they. And so it's collections of stories that are funny, that are heartbreaking, that are just classically as American as apple pie. This person wanted to serve. They had some barriers in front of them. They overcame them. And now look at them. And that, plus the leadership book that I wrote, I think really informs the way I lead, the way I understand things, and encourages me, and I think encourages others to, instead of embracing kind of this bullying, hazing culture that is so pervasive in America and still in some aspects in our military, where you put on someone and say, I went through some shit. And until you go through the same shit, I'm not going to respect you. Instead, we flip it and like, I went through some really terrible things and hurt, and it was hard. So what I'm going to do, because you're going to have enough adversity in your life regardless, is I'm going to knock down that barrier that I had to overcome. So by the time you make it to where I am, you have the energy to go further. And I think that's a critical mindset for our military, because it has to be about how are we better tomorrow than we are today. So if we can knock down the things that are bureaucratic nonsense, or that are just simply hurdles placed in a way that aren't developmental, let's get rid of those. Let's allow the generation coming up behind us to go even further, do even more.
Speaking of bureaucratic nonsense, what point in your recent memory, your career, did you decide to enter the world of elected politics? I mean, talk about, you're already a transparent person putting on for the world to see all these, all of these things about you. But now, what's that extra level of scrutiny you're going to get in the political world?
Well, I wanted to serve for years, if not a decade or more. I fought. I pushed back. I walked up to the line and stood on it. I never crossed it, but I stood on it and I shouted with everything I had while I was still in service, on top of doing my job and doing it the right way without partisan bias or politicization. But I told people's story. And I was willing to fight that fight as long as I possibly could. And I told people I would have done it until I was dragged away. But when the Supreme Court, on emergency appeal from the government, said, okay, you can fire all these people right now, it was the first time I had to realize I have to do something else. There has to be a what's next. Was my way in choosing between, look, I could go out and get an advocacy job. I could work for an organization defending democracy, because I did not countenance going back and working in the defense or aerospace industry right now. I love it. I love technology. I love space. I want to make that stuff happen still. But I've learned and I've developed a skill set that is focused on taking care of others and fighting for the future. And politics was the answer. Because if I could do this, if I, like so many other trans military people, have shown that trans folks can thrive in those most difficult of environments, let's keep doing that in other areas. But it's not about me that I can do this. It's about how can we do this? How can the country be better? And if along the way to winning a seat in Congress, I can also do just what I talked about for knocking down barriers, showing others that, yes, even you can engage in the political process. You can run for office. You can work on a staff. You can be part of a campaign. Great. And I can also give people hope that we can get through this, that maybe we don't need to have people fleeing this country. We should have people instead saying, I want to fight for what we have, who we know we are, and who we can be. That's why I'm in politics. Give a vision of a better future.
For young people watching this who feel torn between being authentic and fitting in, what would you tell them?
There's a lot of psychology that we learn. I mean, we can go to things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Safety is number one. Like, if you are physically unsafe, sometimes there's a need to protect yourself. And everyone's circumstance is going to be different. But what I can say is when you can be yourself, when you can be authentic, it is such a gift. It is so amazing. By being yourself and loving yourself, understanding yourself, you radiate that out into the world and it comes back to you. It's not just trans people. It's not just queer people that feel this. I know I mentioned this earlier, that it is all people that have a different work self than authentic self. There was a 3-star Navy Admiral that came and spoke to a class, and he said, it wasn't until I got my 3rd star, and this a heterosexual Christian white man. He said, it wasn't until that 3rd star that I felt like I could remove my heavy cloak and be myself. And it shouldn't be that way. No one should feel that kind of pressure that you have to conform. Yes, in the military and in other structures, there are rules we have to follow. There are things that allow us to bond with one another, shared morals and values that are incredibly important. But there's room for individuality in that. There's room for authenticity. I think about it as it's a pathway for connection. When we're our authentic selves, when we're a little vulnerable with who we are, it's not a weakness as an opening in our armor. That's reaching out. That saying, connect with me. Let's figure it out. Let's work together on this stuff.
As a senior leader, I shared a lot of my personal weaknesses with the folks I led. And it was such, as you described, it was such a relief. I had a woman from another group, when I was a group commander, that she came up and hugged me in the hallway saying, thank you for sharing your story. And I said, rather than thanking me, why don't we encourage others to share their stories as well? Because when you share your weaknesses, when you let people know that you're having a bad day, or you let people know your shortcomings, it just humanizes you. Where have we lost that? Where you need this machismo and you have to be this tough person all the time and not show that human side.
I wish I knew, because for me, before I transitioned, I thought I was putting out into the world, I'm authentic, I'm open to your issues, your challenges. But I learned I was walking around with a shield in front of me like I was Captain America. And that's how people saw me, like I was perfect or invulnerable. And that, when you have that, gives off the impression that I'm so good, why would I care about you? And so when I transitioned, and in a weird way, this is a bit of a backhand against women too, that people will bring women their problems far more easily. And so, like, great, I'm glad you recognize me as who I am, but it was coming out and lowering that shield. Like, as a commander, my lieutenants all of a sudden were in my office bringing me their problems, that were personal training. And like, where was this before? And we were able to solve those personal problems that were bleeding over into work, and it made them better at work, and they were just happier people. So I think that is critically important. When we share a piece of our humanity, our vulnerability also comes back to us, because people think we care. Even if we knew we would have cared anyways and been there for it, they might not see it that way. So that's where sharing that really matters, is it opens pathways to solve problems together.
And you get so much more effort. You get so much more buy-in from your team, knowing that they can come to you and, behind closed doors, share a personal thought. You just get the maximum out of your team.
Yeah.
And I wish that, you said you authored a book on leadership. Why is it so difficult for folks to accept that type of leadership? I mean, is it progressive? I don't know, but it seems to really rub a lot of people the wrong way.
I think we're brought up in this culture that just says, be perfect, don't admit weakness, and it will be used against you if you do. And it's just a tough thing to get past psychologically. But when we do that, when we are able to acknowledge our faults, I think that's really powerful, because that also focuses on the other thing we say we want people to have, which is a growth mindset. And if you are putting out into the world that you're perfect, there's no growth from perfect. How do you take a step forward if you're like, hey, I can actually be better at this. I can be better at engaging on both an emotional and an intellectual level. I can not only tell you that I care, I can show you that I care. And we have that classic statement of, people aren't going to remember you from what you told them. They're going to remember whether or not you cared. And that's something we have to get past.
So true. So, okay, you've got some superhero metaphors. You mentioned Captain America. You mentioned Star Trek. Who was your Captain America in your youth that even inspired you to start seeking this military path? You mentioned that you had a large military family background.
Both my grandparents have incredible stories. One was the son of immigrants from Latvia and Ukraine, and he served as a second lieutenant and in the Army Signal Corps. Twice was behind enemy lines in Germany. In one case, he was 20 miles away from the Army with his 20 men and captured the entire city, really, of Solingen, over 100,000 people, by creating some false signals intelligence, following phone lines into town, walking into City Hall and saying, "You're surrounded, surrender." And they did. Thousands of German prisoners from the countryside were held by his 20 men until the Army caught up several days later. I mean, guile. And truly incredible career that he had in just a couple of years. But my other grandfather, who got out of Nazi Germany in 1936, thanks to a tiny window in the Berlin Olympics, where he got on a midnight train to Paris the day before the SS came to arrest the family. He, as soon as he was able, old enough, raised his hand and said, "Send me back. I know what evil is."
Wow.
And he rose to become the youngest first sergeant in the European Theater of Operations of the tanker twice awarded the Bronze Star for Valor, offered a battlefield commission, which he turned down so he could stay with his unit. I mean, maybe he wanted to stay in the tanks rather than move to the infantry, but that's a story he didn't tell. I turned it down to stay with my unit. And his exploits were amazing. Personally yelled at by Patton to rip all that goddamn armor off the tanks.
Wow.
So they could move a little faster as they were taking ground at the end of the war. An amazing legacy. And he was a big inspiration. When I was commissioned, he came. It was the last time he ever traveled. He came. He gave me my first salute, and then afterwards, I went back to his hotel room and I sat down on the bed. And there's photographic evidence of this. He gave me one of his Bronze Stars mounted in a plaque that says, "Courage does not always roar. It's the quiet voice at the end of the day. I will do my best again tomorrow." And the look on my face at that time was confusion. I didn't get it then as a 23-year-old brand new second lieutenant. I sure as hell do now. And what he was trying to say about how many times you're knocked down. And it's about getting back up, taking that next step, and keeping fighting. Because sometimes it isn't that day, that moment, but it's going to be being there for the next one. And he got to know the real me at the end, near the end of his life, and was my biggest supporter. Every time I was promoted, he would get the biggest smile. His eyes would go wide. Wow, a captain, a major, no way. A lieutenant colonel, that's incredible. And not too long after I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, literally the day the ban on trans people went back into place in 2019, in the first Trump administration, I had to drive home back to Minnesota to my family. It was going to be his 95th birthday party. Got there, my mom said, "You need to go see your grandfather right away." In the hospice. And I'm like, yeah, of course. So I go, he's in a bed, in a haze, drugged. I squeeze his hand, and he gets that thing, seeing me, and he fades back. And I sit there for a couple hours. As family comes and goes, I'm going to try one more time. Yeah. So before I leave, I squeeze his hand tight, and he gets the same wide eyes, and just like the plaque, he says, "Keep doing what you're doing." And those are the last words he spoke. And I was lucky enough to have a memoir of his that he wrote, and he was a terrible author. It's like, great story, the worst writing. But I learned in there, he didn't like swearing. It wasn't his thing. But when I told his story and my other grandfather's story, when I was promoted to colonel, I knew he would have said, "Holy shit." And
Thank you for sharing that story. When someone tells your story in the future, what truth do you hope lives the longest?
that I was there for people. Everything I possibly could have on behalf of my nation, my family, and the future.
For our listeners and our viewers, before we close, I want to take a moment to reflect on your journey. You exemplify a kind of service that does not end when the uniform is removed, even when that removal is forced, contested, or painful. Your story reminds us that leadership is not about comfort, it's about consistency. The courage to stay present through transition, to speak truth when it's risky, and to carry conviction when ease would be easier. You serve this nation not just in war zones, or in strategic planning rooms, but by insisting that service itself should be inclusive, clear, and open to anyone willing to commit it with honor. This is the heart of our story on Voice for Valor. It's not just about preserving your memory, but elevating purpose. So Bree, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you for your example.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.